the intro. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Hey, everyone.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, and for having me. And I am going to go to a little bit about bounties. So let me see. Screen share. There we go. And let me know if you can see this.
Yep. Oh, you got to hit present to everyone.
Yeah. Is that cool? No. Is that working?
No, you got to find the present to everyone button after you screen share. There's a present to everyone button.
Let's see.
Oh, wait.
So right now it's not just moving on our audio. We can mute ourselves.
Yeah, let's mute ourselves so that it focuses on that.
So I'm doing share now.
We see it.
Does that work? More or less?
It's not coming through this second.
We did see it, and then we muted ourselves, and you spoke, and we ceased to see it.
Oh.
Yeah, weird. Okay,
There you
now
go,
we
yeah.
are seeing it. We'll mute again.
Okay, yeah. The
Okay,
present to
so-
everyone was on my side. Thank you, Shane.
Oh.
Thank
Okay. So do you see everything now?
No, as soon as you did whatever you just did, we lost the screen. Yeah, we got it back now.
Okay. So I was clicking play, but it's fine in Keynote.
Oh, okay, we're gonna mute ourselves now. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much. So as Chelsea said, I am a co-founder of the Bounties Network, and we created the Bounties Network. We went live on mainnet with the standard Bounties protocol at the end of 2017. The idea with the protocol was to essentially have a standardized protocol that all bounty platforms would sit on top of. That was not necessarily something that some other bounty platforms wanted to do. So we went ahead and created our own Explorer. And what we very much focused on throughout 2018 and coming into 2019 is to diversify what we apply bounties to. Diversify verticals, diversify different kind of ways that we can use this very, very powerful tool that incentivizes and organizes action. So just as a quick definition, bounties are just rewards that are offered by an individual or an organization for the completion of a certain task. Now, this task can be anything and everything from, design, music, art, research, social impact, and these are all verticals that we have worked with, that we have created numerous bounties across, and that have proven as incredibly powerful use cases for the bounty as a format. And so from there, we kind of started experimenting with a lot of collaborations and a lot of different and creative ways of re-engineering means of income and re-engineering how people contribute to projects, how people get involved in meaningful projects, and really kind of pushing the way that dynamic works and moving it away from the usual kind of very one-dimensional structures that we have in Web 2, where we kind of focus on an individual from one angle, whereas I certainly believe that human beings are kind of a 360 affair. So just to delve into a couple of examples, and then the first one will be, I'll talk to you about it, and then we'll go into the second one, which focuses on social impact in a little bit more detail. But the first one I wanted to chat to you about is a recent one that we launched as in a partnership with Bixura, which is a platform that allows the tokenization of art, works of art, and so digital art. And we created this project called the Faces of Aetherium. It's essentially a project that's designed to crowdsource portraits or self-portraits of the people building our space. And I called it Ethereum, but at the end of the day, it can be just the world of blockchain, let's say. And the idea with it was to use bounties to incentivize people to contribute these portraits. But the ultimate goal is to accumulate them throughout 2019, then create a giant image made up of all of these individual artworks, then all tokenized, then sell it at an auction, not sure, maybe, I don't know, DEFCON 5 or something like that, and then take the funds made from the auction, 10%, put it towards social impact bounties, and then the rest distributed to the artists that participated, or to the people that participated in the project. The idea with this, of course, is because each work of art is tokenized, the ownership belongs to the artist that created it, so therefore they can sell it and trade it completely independently of what we're doing with the big picture. And moving from that, so that's been a really interesting case for us. And again, it's proven incredibly successful. We launched this project at ETH Denver, and we're almost pushing 40 submissions. And it's been incredibly well received. And in conjunction with this kind of portrait bounty, we've also had quite a few on music. So quite a few of the music bounties have mainly focused on sourcing one particular piece of music for a track, or indeed creating remixes or mixes of established tracks. So those very, very creative use cases for bounties have also been incredibly popular and incredibly straightforward. But let's focus a little bit on social impact, because I think this is one of the areas that kind of the ecosystem has talked about it a lot, but we haven't really seen that many, walking of the walk versus just talking the talk. So some quick stats for you. We see these all the time, but potentially the fact that they are still there for us to talk about is a clear indication that things need to change. 40% of the world population is still unbanked. Only 36% of again, the world population have smartphones with internet access, and then 80% of humanity lives under $10 a day. So all of these keep coming back, and it is a testament of the fact that, okay, they are incredibly hard problems to solve, but at the same time, there is clearly something that isn't quite working in the social impact status quo. And so if we introduce things like blockchain, and of course, I'm going to be chatting about bounties, the three main aspects kind of happen here is the transparent funding. So one of the things that has plagued the charity sector for as many years as it's been around, I guess, maybe save one or two when they first started, but it's been this complete and utter opacity in terms of what happens to the funds once they are gathered from individuals. Do the funds actually get or are used for their intended purpose, or are they used on, as we've seen so many times, on marketing, on bonuses for executives, and so on. And so from this transparent funding, when you add a smart contract layer, and for a bounty, this is very, very simple, is you have that function of contributing to the smart contract versus contributing to a wallet. Therefore, if you contribute to a bounty, you know that the whole pot of that bounty will go to the payouts for that particular bounty, and you can trace them and you can track them, and of course you can have full visibility on that. And then, of course, the secure data. This is particularly relevant when we're talking about vulnerable individuals, like refugees, and reintegrating them or integrating them into a particular community. This again will benefit greatly from this immediate access to data, and a much safer way of storing that data versus what we have right now, which is pretty dire in terms of cross-country or cross-continent data exchange. And then, of course, lasting change. Now, this I mainly focus on the environment. I think we see a lot of initiatives that are going around all the time, and they're usually hashtag on social media. Everybody posts photos and then they go back to doing whatever it is that they were doing before this new kind of craze happened, and they could share their activities on social media. So the lasting change in terms of environmental bounties, you can set them for longer periods of time where the rewards are set to accumulate and not dispense, and then almost re-engineer a certain type of behavior to make sure that that environmental change is a little bit more sustainable than we've seen before. And this is just as an example. You could have a bounty set up for a business and say, okay, I need verifiable proof that you are purchasing bamboo cutlery for takeaway lunches instead of plastic. And they need to submit the invoice for that bamboo cutlery for 6 months, let's say. And only at the end of the 6 months do they get the payout. So it accumulates, but it's only at the end of the period that they get the payout. And furthermore, what you could do on top of that is enable them to potentially choose the amount and the tokens accumulated to then go to other social impact projects. So you kind of potentially could do this pay it forward mechanism, which would be very, very powerful indeed. And so the big opportunity here, and the big opportunity that I personally see with bounties is threefold. The first one is broadening the access to information, resource, and work. I think this is incredibly important and incredibly promising in terms of what we can do with Web3 and what we can do with these new mechanisms that we're building. And when I say broadening the access, it means broadening the access for individuals and communities that haven't necessarily had a seat at the table before, but also enabling people to take back a little bit of control, or a little bit more control of their time, their what they're putting their time and their skills in the service of. Mobilizing people from underserved communities, and this doesn't just have to focus on, developing countries. This can be communities. These can be communities on our doorstep that have been neglected by social and economical systems for ages, and this could be that opportunity that allows us to enable them to tap into all of these resources, and then creating alternative frameworks to deliver income and value. I think this, again, is very, very powerful, because there's all of this talk about traditional jobs disappearing and what we're going to do because technology is taking them all away. So therefore, we must potentially create alternatives to those jobs, to those means of income that are no longer sustainable or no longer a part of the day-to-day reality. And so, as an example, I'm going to talk to you about our Bounties for the Oceans project. So the Bounties for the Oceans, we essentially set up in partnership with MakerDAO at the end of May last year, beginning of June. It was for World Oceans Day that we created it, actually. And it was this idea that we wanted to have something that lasts longer than a day, and lasts longer than people sharing their lovely images of planet Earth for one day using a hashtag. And so we created it really to see what would happen if we create this task that essentially said, submit verifiable proof of a cleanup, be it on a beach, in a park, on a street, wherever you are, on a riverbank, and we will reward you with 10 DAI for every verifiable submission. The idea here is to really re-engineer that mechanism of, I'm not going to ask an individual for money for a contribution, I'm actually going to reward them for a positive action, for a positive and verifiable cleanup. And so we launched it, and very, very quickly we started getting submissions from all over the world. So we started getting submissions from across the UK, across the US, across Europe. We had people from Venezuela submitting, from Tasmania, from also from Romania. So it really started being something that we understood was very, very powerful. And not only was it powerful in terms of these cleanups, but it was powerful because a lot of the people who were getting involved had no interaction with blockchain or with crypto before they completed this bounty. So we started thinking, hold on a second, this can genuinely be that catalyst that allows us to re-engineer the social impact and environmental impact dynamic that we've kind of been seeing for the past few decades. And we decided to test it out in Manila, in Manila Bay in the Philippines, and test it out with a large group of people. Because we wanted to see, okay, the individual cleanups, they work great, but what happens if you go on the ground in a country like the Philippines, where potentially the internet isn't as good, the smartphone coverage isn't that good, and there's a hell of a lot of trash. So the Philippines is the third most polluted country in the world. And the Manila Bay in particular is incredibly polluted. The beaches there are just incredibly dirty. And so we went on the ground and wanted to see what would happen if we had people cleaning up on 2 days. We only cleaned up for 2.5 hours each day because it started getting very, very hot. And so we didn't want people to obviously be in the sun for too long. And we had 224 people. And we essentially ran this for 2 days. It was an incredible learning experience for us. It allowed us to gain some incredible insights and to actually prove that it is something that is completely doable as a model of distributing funds and of incentivizing and organizing action. And I would love to share this with you. It's only a minute long, but it's essentially the trailer for the documentary that we filmed there. We're gonna release the full documentary. We're just entering it on into a couple of film festivals before that, mainly because the director and the director of photography did it for us for an incredibly, it was a work of passion. So we want them to be able to enter it to these things. So let's see, hopefully this plays. Shout if it doesn't.
The trash issue really is impacting people's lives.
Garbage everywhere.
Pupunta dito ang tao para mangingisda. Pag-uwi, wala rin naman makuha dahil lahat ng basura napupunta sa dagat, ang kalat.
What happens when a traditional job like fishing stops being sustainable? You need to create new means of income. You need to create alternatives.
Incentives are behavior changing. If you're able to channel that, you're going to be able to mobilize a lot of people.
Ang ginagawa namin is hindi para sa amin, hindi para sa next future generation.
We saw that monetary incentives were a great way to get people on the ground. But now that they're here, they actually can look past those incentives and really feel the intrinsic motivation.
So with that, again, it's a very, very brief glimpse of what we did, and you'll see more when we release the full documentary, which is only about 15 minutes long, but it kind of explains a lot more about what we did. And essentially one of the biggest desires from our side was to make sure that this is something that closed the loop. So we didn't just want to turn up, give people magic internet money to clean up this beach and then go away. So you saw a guy there mentioning the incentives. That was Ron from coins.ph. That is an exchange on the ground in the Philippines, and we partnered with them to make sure that people could exchange the ETH into peso. So we paid out in ETH for this one, mainly because they didn't at the time have ERC20 integration. So the rewards were in ETH. We paid the equivalent of about $5 for the 2.5 hours. Some people came on both days, so they got paid twice. And the main goal with it was to essentially create something that can remain even after we're gone, because that is essentially the big difference here. It's that bounty that we created for this particular event is still live. It still has funds in it, and it continues to be fulfilled by some of the people that we onboarded on those days. And this is where the power of this mechanism comes from, because once people are onboarded, there is this task and there is this payment mechanism that's the automation of this international payment is really quite slick compared to what we have in the banking system today. You can ensure a potential sustainable loop that allows these guys who again were traditionally fishermen to create a new or have a new means of income whilst getting their environment back to its former health. And so again, from the perspective of, let's say, a social impact or a charity model, you are re-engineering that flow of money, creating new jobs, and of course, reducing those admin costs because, again, we're not there any longer and it's still going. And also for the bounty, we obviously put a lot of the money in, but we actually crowdsourced the money for it as well. So remember when I mentioned that contribute function for the bounties, we had donations from individuals. There were some people donated $5, some donated 10, 20, and of course some projects put a little bit more in. But the idea is, again, you can crowdsource funds for a project and you can see where your money goes. It's completely transparent. And again, it will only go to those payouts. And so some stats from an environmental perspective, obviously it's peanuts, but still, considering we were there for 5 hours in total, we managed to collect 3.3 tons of trash. And also because we didn't want to just clean it up and then, leave it, we again partnered with a company on the ground who does recycling. They helped us collect it, they helped us segregate it, and then they essentially create from the plastic, they create these big slabs that are pavement slabs that the Manila Highway Association or Highway Committee or government or I don't know, Department for Highways, let's say, use it to construct the new highways or any repairs. They use these slabs. So again, you have that circular thing where the plastic keeps coming, these guys keep recycling it, making these slabs, and on it goes. And the guys doing the cleanups keep getting paid, which again is a very nice, sustainable model. And so some of the main things that we learned, because again, having 224 people in the middle of Manila Bay with no Wi-Fi, we learned a few things. The main three were education. It was by far the biggest thing that we faced. And I think it really stretched us in terms of making sure that we described everything whilst we were onboarding them onto wallets, whilst we were explaining what this cryptocurrency was, whilst we were explaining how they can then turn it back into peso and so on. It really tested us to make sure that we everything that we explained was incredibly accessible. And that is, again, something that I am very passionate about, to ensure that everything we put out and everything that we talk about is accessible at all levels, and that nobody feels excluded from this because, I don't know, they're not technically minded, or they don't know the ins and outs of what blockchain is, and so on. So again, with the crypto wallets, the only wallet that was available to download was Trust Wallet, and only 10% of the participants had working smartphones. So what we had to do was to essentially, everybody who had smartphones, we onboarded them, but everybody who didn't, we had one person with smartphone in a group to make sure that they got paid for everybody's, in their team, for everybody's contribution, and then they would dispense the money to the other members of the team directly in peso. So that was kind of the interim solution that we found. And of course, that was possible because of CoinsPH, and that would be something that wouldn't have been possible had they not been there. But again, something that is very important to keep in mind is that as we go towards developing countries, or countries that aren't necessarily as hooked up to Wi-Fi as we are, the internet was incredibly slow, and everybody buys, for the phones, everybody buys their data by the minute. So if you're then telling them, well, you need to download this wallet, that might take you, I don't know, 5 minutes or 10, then I need to send you some ETH to pay for gas, then you need to complete the bounty and so on, that's going to be a pretty lengthy process. So we obviously learned that there's a lot of things that we need to improve. There's a lot of things that we need to reduce in terms of steps, to reduce in terms of complexity and so on. One of the big bonuses for us was obviously because was that we have a fully mobile responsive dApp, so that was easy to do once we had them on the wallets and on the browsers. So in terms of this leveling out of the playing field and this access to those three key focuses, the information, the resource, and the work, I really think this is a model that will enable us to do that, and not necessarily just thinking, again, as I mentioned, to thinking of faraway countries and populations, but really on our doorstep. All of these are applicable anywhere in any community, and I'm sure we all know of communities or even use cases where this would apply. So being able to incentivize and organize action is something that can be done much better. And in terms of generating those means of income, again, you can apply it to education. Why have this constant model of you need to pay to learn? Why not have it the other way around? Why don't you get paid for the time or get rewarded for studying or completing a certain module? And this is something, again, that we are working on. And I think that will be a very important piece as we evolve.
Simona.
Oh.
I was curious. I wanted to just jump back a slide.
Yeah.
For the material challenges you were talking about with like low access to data and stuff like that, have you guys looked into using anything like Austin Griffith's burner wallet, or even just like old school paper wallets?
He didn't have it at the time. So we would do, yes. So we would do something like that, or even look at something that we could do involving a just text-based situation. So that's definitely something that we're looking into as an option.
Cool, thank you.
So yeah, that was pretty much me done. These were some of the guys that participated, and a couple that are still doing it. And then I was going to end with the classic quote from Vitalik: "Change the incentives, change the world." And then I was going to open it up for questions.
You gotta unmute.
Yeah.
Oh, and I was going to thank you.
Thank you, Simona. Any questions on site from the audience? I've been asked if you're open to other ocean cleanup projects in the future.
100%. Yes. Yes.
Oh, cool. Ocean Legacy is another project, and they are here. Represent or someone who thinks they're cool is here.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. They're Bounties.network, so they're pretty easy to reach directly there. I've got to ask Simona, because this is kind of what I put Gitcoin to the coals on. Is there any way? So, what sort of currency transfer is there, and is there any way we could get Bitcoin onto the platform?
This is on our roadmap. Bitcoin bounties will be happening later this year.
Oh, dope. That's a very easy and direct answer. Awesome. Because with Gitcoin, they provided publicly the R&D that got a DAI payout to be done, but there's like it stopped at R&D. So we're talking about maybe implementing BTC Relay for Gitcoin.
Okay.
Yeah. So is that the route you guys are going? Do you know what route you're going? Because is it just
we're not sure.
Area, right?
We're not sure. There's a lot of maturing we need to do for the product anyway. And there'll be some pretty cool stuff coming, and it will be part of this kind of reshuffling of things so that it becomes something that's a lot more natural, I guess. And again, serving that whole, like, let's be broad, let's allow everybody, and let's make sure that we accommodate everybody as well. But I'll update you guys once we know.
Awesome. Thank you. Anders.
Over there,
oh, sure. Yeah, you can come say hi.
Hello.
Hello.
What are the easiest ways to improve the uptake on bounties by changing the bounty system?
What do you mean?
Improve the uptake on bounty completion. So increase the number of people who are interested in trying the bounty or doing the bounty, or who complete the bounty.
So actually, the people fulfilling the bounties, there's a lot of them. I think in terms of increasing the uptake, it will be more and more bounties being created. Honestly, that's the main thing now. We have so many people in our community that the second a bounty comes up, they jump on it, mainly because we focus on these non-technical bounties, and people are very, very keen to come into our space, but don't necessarily have the skill level, or they're not necessarily developers, or they're not necessarily, able to work on any kind of technical tasks, which is why they flock to the Bounties Network, because there is all of this creative work, because there's the social impact stuff, because there's translations, because there's user research, because there's all of these, different propositions that don't necessarily have those barriers before in stopping involvement or participation.
Awesome. And what's the distribution? Do you know roughly the distribution of tasks on Bounties Network? Because you've got a lot of design tasks and stuff like that on there compared to, Gitcoin was originally just like GitHub issues. So what's your community based on? Like, distributed?
So literally with, because I don't know if I'm just going to mention it to everyone. So Gitcoin sits on top of our protocol. So I mentioned the standard bounties protocol. Gitcoin sits on top of it as the vertical for open source, right? So they do the technical bounties, like you mentioned, GitHub issues. And that's very much focused on this whole idea of growing open source and making it a lot more accessible. We do everything else. So our focus was always to have something that goes broad, and design is one of the key ones that we have. Again, art is one of the big ones that we have. And in our community, we have people from maybe 150 countries, and they have a wide range of backgrounds. Again, there's a lot of designers, but then there's a lot of artists, there's DJs, there's project managers, there's translators, there's poets, there's content creators, you name it.
I have a question.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah.
How are the bounties funded? Where's the capital coming from?
Sure. So it depends. So if you need something done, like Chelsea just created that bounty for me to say up. She created that and put her own money into it. But you have a lot of people who are, and a lot of projects who need things done. So, for instance, we're prepping now for a bounty that the East New York organizers are going to put up for a design to feature the Pizza Rat. Or you have people who need redesigns for their websites or their logos, or you have people, like I mentioned before, or you have projects that have crowdsourced blog posts from their communities, and then they would fund them. But again, you can also have crowdfunded bounties. So one of the main examples here is when there was a benchmarking study done between Ethereum and EOS that was crowdfunded, and that was, I think, 20,000, the equivalent of $20,000, and that was the funds for that were gathered from the project in the projects in the Ethereum ecosystem.
Or you, I can.
Yeah, how do you handle disputes on like bounties that's not easily verifiable?
Sure. So that's a very good question, and we get that a lot. It's essentially we are working on an arbitration model called Delphi. We've been working on it for a while. That's going to be something that we essentially add to the platform and the product to handle any kind of escalations of conflicts. So far, we've discovered that a lot of the conflicts are solved by communication between the two parties, and also as long as the bounties are very clear. So, as an example, there were a couple of bounties that were set up without mentioning that there were a contest, i.e. only one submission will be accepted. And so people who were submitting were kind of going, well, you didn't state that it would just be one. Why am I not getting paid? But as long as you are incredibly clear in your description, this is a contest, we will only accept one submission or the top 3 or 5, then I can then choose as a fulfiller, do I want to get involved in this? Do I have time? Do I want to risk not getting paid for this? Or am I just going to go for something like this cleanup one where everybody gets paid, or user research one where everybody gets paid, or potentially a broader project where I can have a contribution, a smaller contribution, and it doesn't have to be for the full reward of the bounty. And this is something that we're adding to the protocol. So our standard bounties 2.0 is going through security audit, and we're just implementing their, well, it went through security audit and we're just implementing their recommendations, but it will have percentage payments. So what you will have is you can run a full project with different people getting involved at different levels and creating different or working on different sections of the project, and then being able to pay them accordingly.
I just want to add, having onboarded with your platform today, too, you know, like how you were explaining that the documentation of what you expect in a bounty is crucial. So when you're setting up a bounty on Bounties Network, you set all your basic stuff, kind of like you were setting up a meetup page, and then you get an empty text entry that has an example template in Markdown of like description and how to create a header. Objective 1, Objective 2. So I think that is really where Bounties design lives and dies, is can you clearly, like, is this a vague and creative prompt, which people could interpret wildly differently? Or, as you guys have kind of laid out, like, is it a 1, 2, 3 step sort of clearly defined task?
I think we're also going to look at templates, because one of the things that we, again, we do, everything that we do in terms of design, and anytime we rework anything, it's very much based on the user interviews that we do. Our designer Corwin is just going through some user interviews now. And so one of the things that keeps coming up is I would like to have something that's kind of a little bit already there, so that it guides me even further if, for instance, I want to set up a design bounty. It should take me, like, it should tell me that I should include what type of file it is, or the size, or just things people completely slips their mind. And then, of course, they'll get X amount of files that aren't what they want, or the right style, or whatever. And then they'll be like, well, why don't they know what's in my mind? But as any client brief, as long as you give it very detailed with what you need, and the exact requirements, you're going to get something a lot closer to what it is that you want. And again, you'll avoid these disputes.
Awesome. Do we have maybe a last question from anyone?
I have an observation.
An observation, right?
So I watched this documentary that came out last year on the world's dirtiest river. It's on YouTube, so you can find it. And what had happened is this river that used to be the lifeline of Indonesia was basically polluted with so much trash that it killed off like fishermen's ability to collect produce or whatever. And so the fishermen had started collecting pop bottles. Like they would go in and they would take the pop bottles, leave everything else, and that was what. So the observation is that it seems like you've taken something that we are all familiar with, and you've actually made something that's more effective because it's more broad-reaching. You're not saying go get the cans. You're saying go clean up the area, and I think that's really cool. So.
And again, I think because it has, and I've had this conversation because in talking about this and in showing this to people, so many of them react with, oh, but what happens to good old volunteerism? And it's great when people go and volunteer to do these things, but wouldn't it be even better if you were getting rewarded with a certain amount for consistently doing it and repeating it? So that for me is something that's far more powerful, especially for people who, let's say, I don't know, maybe you don't want to get paid. That's fine. Push the reward that you would get towards something else or towards somebody else, right? And then you create this whole mechanism where that money that would, I don't know, have not really been spent or be misspent, you have it in circulation and going towards people actually doing things on the ground. And I think building on top of that and replicating that model across like Indonesia, in Thailand, wherever, like here, wherever, it's something that's easily replicable. And I'd love to do it in Vancouver. We need to sort it out.
Second observation?
Yes.
Because you just mentioned something that I thought of earlier. It bugs me forever that the things that are most valuable in society have the least value economically, and what you're doing kind of flips that a little bit around.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for being such a good sport. It is 3:40 a.m. your time now. You will have to, after you get some rest, walk me through how to, I guess, find the, I think I sent you a link to the bounty. So
I'll have a little look at it.
Yeah, apply to claim it because you are the only you, and it's very specifically for you doing this.
I will do.
And to anybody watching on the live stream, we're going to take probably a 5-minute break and orient here. We'll put it on mute, and then we'll come back. Good night. Thank you so much.
See you later.
but we started on Monday in Arnhem. So it just happens in cities around the world throughout the week. So the organizers, we have a multi-sig wallet where we share funds for global sponsors and we divvy it up. So yeah, here we just started today. It was the first day in Vancouver, and it'll probably start ramping up through the weekend. It's super cool that, so I didn't even organize all the events in Vancouver. I put more effort into Saturday and Sunday, and then people like these Her and Decontrol started throwing events throughout the week. So anyone can do that.
And what's happening Saturday and Sunday, Andrew Wagner?
Blockchain Gaming Expo, mass blockchain wedding.
Yeah, mass blockchain wedding is happening in Vancouver.
I think a lot of people are excited about the wedding at this point.
It's hilarious.
It's very serious.
It's all like people who are already married. It's not like a bunch of strangers getting married. It's like devoted couples who are all going to come together.
Mass weddings are a thing traditionally. There have been normal mass weddings in the past where they'll do like a bunch of people in a crowd, couples each, all at the same time. Just with the blockchain though.
Yeah.
It'll be great. You can join us. Bring a spouse. Yeah, please. We'll get champagne. We have champagne. Only couples married on the blockchain are allowed to drink it.
I love how I'm gonna love it if you manage to convince some couples to get married just so they can get that champagne. Because I've heard you say that like 3 times.
It's nice champagne. Anyway, that's the show.
No.
stranger.
Yeah.
CoinFest is the world's oldest decentralized convention and probably the only one. So
Yeah,
Andrew
and
just
it
made
is
it here.
really dope. It's strong in the UK and Africa, stuff like that. And it really seems to have arisen from the first Bitcoin nerds bopping around being like, let's get people to use this. This is brilliant, And so I think it has maintained that community spirit. And that's why people just kind of throw events together for it.
Yeah, like a holiday.
Yeah.
We say happy CoinFest to each other.
But yeah, so we have, you've got to mute me for this part.
Aren't you muted?
The thing is there.
Oh, did you unmute?
Yeah, I unmuted so that we could get the stream of,
That is always
I'm going to.
This is as far as it goes. We should get this cord off of it. The mic is good for room mic, though.
Okay. I'm going to restart the meetup now. We are live.
Chelsea, go like this.
Hey, everybody. That includes Wagner and Taylor.
What's up, boys?
Good to see you. I love you guys. I was thinking, so we were originally going to beam someone in to talk about a project, like you know, symmetrical with our time with Simona. But since we couldn't get anyone in from Gitcoin, I figured we might as well just look at economic models for the new age of labor, sort of the stuff that is percolating around all of this, and break up into groups to talk about, as I said before, how we think crypto can help with it, like how we can use the unique properties of cryptocurrency or smart contracts, or if you believe in some transcendence beyond that, how we can use the qualities of crypto economics to fairly compensate everyone as we move forward. So I just wanted to, off the top of my head, I had kind of moved, I'll give like a 5-minute here. I had moved in trying to identify like what are the ways we have compensated labor throughout society. And like way back you got like the indentured servitude, just might makes right, slavery, etc. You've got the literal domination structures. In the modern age and under capitalism, which are varied intermixed generations, both like bemoan and celebrate, you know, like in crypto especially, Bitcoiners are super hype and caps. Ethereum folk like Simona, who we beamed in, are much more collectivist thinkers. But in general, we had fixed wage employee working for the company store. We have independent contractor, which is still the term that is being used for contemporary forms of digital labor that don't quite fit that model anymore. Like I file my taxes as an independent contractor who makes crypto, and that is confusing as hell. And you know, like. But it is something that's stretched from old times, like the idea that you enter into a contract with someone. I will fix your sink. You will pay me this sort of thing. And I think that is something that we're revisiting with smart contracts. Is there a way to create templates for this sort of shit that we could use peer-to-peer in a provable way? Just set, you know, like not have to rely on centralized law structures as much. Now, Bounties and like Fiverr, you know, like online one-off gig labor platforms, I feel like are a next step into the new from that. And then micropayments and tipping, very old concept when it comes to like face-to-face, you know, like street musicians and stuff like that. But the idea that you could tip someone's YouTube video a micro amount that because everyone's doing it, it will slowly accrue into the same sort of, you know, livable wage that current YouTubers are just relying on ad monetization for and hoping they're not going to get deplatformed for content or whatever. Like if we could have peer-to-peer, a micro stream of income from past content you've put out as an artist. That would be a really nice complex addition to, I think we're going to need all these different types of labor compensation as work is automated as we move into the future. Universal basic income is a very, very contentious political concept, but one that keeps coming up a lot. A lot of nation-state lovers love it. You know, I think it's often demeaned as like a communistic or socialistic idea. But I think within the decentralized technology sphere, a lot of folks are seeing the potential for non-nation state-based universal basic income, where you could opt into an agreement with your peers, where you all put in a certain amount and, you know, follow the terms of a smart contract, and then you're able to leave with your share if you feel this is no longer working for you. And finally, much more complex, and we all know how great making things very complex is, but there are a lot of interesting projects in the air right now, like within Ethereum, especially like Moloch DAO, that are claiming to, you know, like revivifying the DAO concept and trying to use DAOs as a way to solve like project resource coordination failures and stuff like that. And basically solve the tragedy of the commons by creating a complicated sharing structure, you know, and basically that's kind of what this place has been for what, 5-6 years now. Like, it's a complex coordination failure of real resources. We have like the spoiler alert for Bounties design tonight is that we just aren't allowed to have trash here anymore. So one of the eyes I applied to like Simona's whole oceans cleanup thing is like, we're going to have to incentivize Bounties for people to take shopping bags of trash with it. You know, like we're going to have to, just like the earth itself shut down. We're going to have to just like create a new ecosystem. And that's going to involve some bounty design. But anyway, so I was pulling out of, that's like kind of the timeline to me of modern capitalistic ways that we compensate each other. I was thinking the things that clump as conversation topics in this current age are bounties, tipping, like like embedded micropayments, monthly fixed patronage, like Patreon, and the universal basic income idea, whether it's a nation state or an organization. And I have been dabbling around. I never actually set up Patreon because I was just such a crypto nerd. I couldn't live with myself because they didn't have that functionality, because they can censor and deplatform and have proven they will. And I chatted with Jeff Vandrew, who is an accountant who created the Libra Patron, like it's BTC Pay server, basically set up so that you can have an auto-pinging email side subscription. But from what he told me, he's working Lightning Network into it. And I think that's, with Bitcoin, that's our maybe, in designing these things, that's our saving point is, okay, now that Lightning Network is live, how do we create recurring membership style structures on it? So again, I'm kind of freeballing on this, but I was going to suggest that we basically self-identify what we'd like to talk about with this. I left my partner's house and locked the door without a key and left all my nice paper and markers there. But I think we've got like stuff kicking. This is a hacker space. We've got stuff kicking around that we can. I just was like, oh shoot, when I opened the door, I'm like, there were also Bitcoin balloons in there, so those will be at the rest of Coin Fest. But yeah. I was like, yeah.
I brought my socks. See, I was going to get some Bitcoin.
Dope. But yeah, so I think for this part, we will go again offline on the stream, and we'll just like cut this part later, and we can just break up, move chairs and stuff like that. How do you guys feel about this? What do you want? Did you guys come here to discuss bounties? Yes.
What's a bounty?
A bounty?
Yeah.
A bounty is a, that would have been a good early question to answer, right? It is a bounded task which needs to be done for a project to succeed, and the people who have taken that project post it and post a, I don't know how to not, what would be the term for the money involved? I just think bounty. Yeah, a reward. They they incentivize it financially with, and they're trying to find that sweet spot, the max of what they can pay comfortably to get someone skilled enough. And I think that's one area we didn't go that deep with Simona, but it comes up a lot in this sort of economic design is like, what types of labor need skill and need contextual awareness? Like if you have to teach every new gig laborer your project, then you're not using your time well at all. Like you do need consistent, real core employees for most of the thinking labor, the deep work labor. But then you need to, like, if someone needs to make you a spreadsheet of all the hotels in the city where you're throwing your conference, like that, you bounty.
Is bounty a crypto or is just a generic concept?
I think it comes from the pirate ages, right? I think
There's a bounty on your head. It's from like.
Yeah, I think it comes from like old school, like sailor times or whatever. Just like I hope the original use wasn't purely wanting someone killed. That's really depressing. But it is the one that comes
Think
to mind.
Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Yeah.
Dog the Bounty Hunter. He collects
He's known for
bounties.
invention of the bounty.
Yeah. So you get to be him.
Well, that's a great modern term. I welcome that.
Yeah. And we do often in our lives. I mean, this is a whole, I think, Craigslist filled for a lot of people for a while. It's like we do sometimes just need someone. Like we don't need a housekeeper coming every week, but like you're about to move out, you need someone to come clean your house. So within platforms like Simona's on Bounties Network, and I presume also Gitcoin, all of those, what they're providing on the user software side is a reputation system where someone can accrue points to show I'm really good at cleaning tasks and I take all these cleaning bounties and I'm highly rated. So the reputation part of that is what's crucial for you knowing you're not going to waste your time. Like, oh, this new account, it's just like Airbnb or something. I'm like, oh, this new suspicious account without a user pick said they're going to clean my house. And that might be someone who's just trying to scam you. So
It's old French. Bonté means goodness. Like bon.
Oh, are you serious? That's so great. Awesome.
That was very useful. Thank you.
Yeah.
You made my night.
Awesome. I was completely making it up, so I'm glad it worked out. But that's some good, solid knowledge right there. We got some party words for French.
Latin. Bonitas or bonus?
Bonus.
Yeah, bonus.
Bonus and bounty have the same origin. That would make sense.
It's all good.
It just makes me think of there's an old, I think, Arrested Development song or something from the 90s, Bonita Applebaum. Bonita Applebaum, you gotta put me on. Bonitas. So yeah, do we want to break up into some groups? We got about, we're gonna hear from Chris in about 20 minutes. Sound good? So I was thinking we could kind of maybe just socialize. It's okay if it's too late at night for us to do like paper and worksheet style things, but just maybe use as a prompt while networking bounties, micropayments and tipping, patronage, universal basic income. But I think it's good when we get lots of different minds from different backgrounds together to talk about like some somewhat targeted topics. I think you can generate some really good creativity.
What do you prefer?
Well, I've been very interested in the patronage model, which is why I've been looking at all these Bitcoin-y platforms for it. I think I'm just going to set them all up and see which works best. I set up Libra Patron earlier today. I didn't do anything with it.
Is patronage always monthly?
All the models I've seen are, but original patronage in Italian art in the 1600s, I think it was more like a sugar person situation.
Sugar person.
You get you get your monthly allotment or whatnot. Can we coin that as a non-offensive term? I'm very proud of that. Sugar person. Person giving another person money to live off of.
Does the sugar person have a sugar daddy?
Yeah.
Trademark it.
Yeah. I'm very against trademarking. But yeah, I think I'm gonna elect Paulo. Can you put on music for 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Play it on the speakers.
Should I stop broadcast or just leave it going?
Mute us. Don't stop. Yeah, we've just been running it. So just know that as you wander about, you're on film. It'll get clipped out later. But if there's one or two people watching, Oh.
Want to put the presidential screen that way?
Oh yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you.
No worries. Bam.
Why is there?
You also need this one also pulled over because like some of the animations got lost. So I'll reference this page for the animations.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay.
I got it.
G-hang.
So you're like, hey, and cue the next animation here, and then look over here.
Basically, yeah. It'll be like this, and then it'll be I think like 3 at the very end.
So we don't need this up. We just minimize this.
But if we want to show the slides,
No, we're just gonna attach
camera.
the slides.
Use the camera.
Do you want to show the slides? It's your call. Yeah, but he's gonna be swapping away from the slides too.
I hate the way it always shows up as that. Like a white screen.
Yeah, you're right.
I think letting him do his talk and then
You can do this.
slides.
Here. You can manage this way. Small screen. You can swap.
Well, there's the present button.
Yeah.
Okay, we want to start. So we want
You don't need to.
You want to do it? Okay, this guy's gonna do it how he thinks is best.
Stop grandmaing each other. Oh, I got the check. I got the check. Okay, so Chris.
No.
Take it away.
Here we go. Everybody. Okay. Yeah. So pretty excited to be here. It's an awesome space. So the title of this presentation. So just a heads up, some of the animations in the presentation are a little wacky. So what we'll do is kind of like do some stuff here, and then we'll also look at some animations over there wherever we want. But so the title of this presentation is From True Ownership to Mass Exodus. This is how we can explore decentralized intellectual property, which is sort of set in counterposition to the decentralized finance stuff that we're all, I think, very used to. So like just for show of hands, how many people here would like be comfortable understanding what like DeFi stuff is, like decentralized finance? So like MakerDAO or Compound. I can like briefly give an overview, but it's basically like any sort of financial instrument that uses smart contracts in a trustless way, where you would truly own any of the financial, like maybe a loan or something like that. Could all be done on chain, right? So it would be done in a peer-to-peer fashion. So I'm with a company called Horde, and we're doing blockchain and video games. So the point is to inject true ownership of assets in games. So like players actually own them, they can rent them out to other players. So we're kind of taking the same sort of ideas from decentralized finance and applying it to stuff that's more intellectual property based. So that's what this presentation is going to be about. So yeah, the next one. So the purpose of the talk is to explore how individuals can extract real value from their online activity. So just sort of like passively, as they're going around and doing their normal behavior, it would be generating and extracting real value from that. So it's sort of like data as labor as sort of an economic model. The premise of the talk is that we already spend a lot of time in synthetic worlds, whether they be video games or social media. And the idea is that this trend is going to continue into the future, where we're only going to spend more time in these synthetic worlds. So how do we set ourselves up for being in the best position when that happens? And what can we also sort of like look for so we know what virtual or synthetic worlds are the best to operate in to deal with traffic value? So just a little bit of background, another technical term, also show of hands. Who here is familiar with the non-fungible token? So a fungible token would be like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Dogecoin. The whole idea is that value of like 2 Bitcoin can be traded for each other, and the value is the exact same, right? So like 1 Bitcoin isn't worth more than another one. But with a non-fungible token, there's unique tokens that can't be replicated, and if you trade 2 tokens for each other, they're not going to have the exact same value. So examples of this would be on the next slide. We've got like a house token. Maybe you tokenize a house, right? If 2 people trade their house tokens for each other, like 1 token that represents their piece of real estate, you're not just trading like one house token for another. It's actually an entirely different house in a different neighborhood. There's a different layout in that home. It's very unique. As mentioned earlier, we see in the decentralized finance world that there are tokens that represent loans. So whoever holds the token owns some sort of debt from someone. Someone has to repay them in the future. So that single token can be traded around, sold at a premium as the risk changes for the person who took out the loan. So that's also a unique token. And of course, items inside of video games all have unique properties. There's a history to them. They all have different like stats as people level items up and things like that. So video game armor might also be a unique token. So this is where we'll want to direct our attention over here. So in the non-fungible token space, blockchain gaming space, there's this theme that gets sort of pushed around a lot. And the basic idea is that if we, I'll wait till this restarts here. If we can somehow figure out a way to create true ownership of the items in our synthetic worlds, like in video games, and somehow that's going to lead to some sort of virtual world future, like the Oasis from Ready Player One, where we're all living in these virtual worlds all the time. I'm ready. The problem with this narrative, as like true as we think it's going to be, there hasn't really been a roadmap drawn out for like how do we get to that point where we're operating in these synthetic worlds and just like we can trust that the value that we engage in, like the economic behavior that we engage in these virtual worlds is actually going to be repaying us. And so click on to the next slide. That's kind of what we're going to be talking about, is what that roadmap looks like. So from true ownership to mass exodus. So that virtual reality future that keeps being talked about, there's a lot of different terms that gets used to describe it. So some people call it the Oasis. Some people refer to it as the metaverse. Some people refer to it as interoperability, like between multiple games, like the games are going to be able to interact with each other. And each one of these terms is really, really good for describing certain perspectives on things. So the Oasis is good for storytelling. It talks about like dystopian futures or utopian futures, depending on how it's phrased. The metaverse kind of dives into more philosophical ideas, mostly about like human experience, like what would it look like for people when they're in this world. And then interoperability talks about the technical construct. So like how exactly would two synthetic worlds like video games interact with each other, and how would items flow between them. But none of these terms really justify why we would ever need blockchain for it. So that's kind of what I want to introduce is this other term, which is mass exodus. And this takes on a much more economic approach. So when we're talking about things in economic terms, what we're doing really is trying to like future forecast and also understand how people consume technology in new ways in the future. And so this term, mass exodus, comes from a book from Edward Casanova, who's an online, like a video game virtual economist, who has done a pretty good amount of writing about this stuff. So he refers to mass exodus as, on the next slide, something that is akin to like discovering the new world. So this analogy in the future is, of course, that the real world is what everyone is leaving, and then the virtual worlds are what people are flocking to. And they're flocking to these virtual worlds because there's some kind of new opportunity in them, there's some sort of new experience for them to explore. It's totally new, and everyone's trying to create and figure out what it means for each other. So, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
So go back if you want.
Please. I love books. I'm
Yeah.
one of those crazy people who actually reads books.
Yeah, I would recommend a lot of this guy's stuff. He has a white paper too.
Oh yeah.
Called what is it called? It's like low skill. I'll look it up later. It's really good, yeah. But it positions a lot of stuff around like how video games are going to influence society in a much grander way than we believed before. Yeah, so talking about like this sort of like mass exodus, like how would you really define it? You'd probably define it in terms of like people spending more time in them than they do in the real world, and they're also moving around more of their property or their assets or their value in these virtual worlds. And so in this book, Edward Casanova describes it as a force that could scale to the point that like GDP is literally drained from some nation states altogether. Like it would become like harder to tax certain events, or they would become transnational events that like would really not fall in any one single jurisdiction. And so if that's sort of like the world that we're looking towards, then what would be some economic forces that would cause people to actually commit themselves to these virtual worlds full time? Because that seems like a very far out idea. In the book, he pretty much keeps the scope limited to fun. Like these worlds are going to be more fun than the real world, and video game developers are already very used to competing with each other in a hyper-competitive way to get users to play their games based on just making experiences more fun than their games. So why would we not assume that at some point virtual worlds would become fun to the point that they compete with the real world? But there's also, I mean, like strong modern economic forces that we can imagine even in our daily lives, like automation and artificial intelligence, which would displace a lot of jobs. So people might turn to these synthetic worlds for virtual work, where human behavior is actually valued. You could even imagine that in some parts of the world, like Simona just presented in the last presentation, so that 80% of the world's population lives on less than $10 per day. So we already see this like World of Warcraft mining farms, where people are just like mining gold all day, they're playing the game, and they're earning income. And for them, that's more than they would make if they were like working in a real marketplace in their local neighborhood. Physically, there are also some limitations to the real world where the virtual worlds might supply people with like a more prosperous experience. If, for example, like they're physically limited in some way, they might be able to gain richer experience in a virtual world than they would in the real world. Also, if an environment, like a physical environment, somehow doesn't suit people anymore, like if someone, like it's expected that it would take like half a year to travel to Mars, if people are really traveling to Mars, what are they going to do for half a year? They would probably be spending a lot of time like in these synthetic worlds, communicating with people back home, with each other, generating maybe some real economic value, something like that. So if we understand like why people would go to these virtual worlds, then it would also be important to understand like what would keep people in some synthetic worlds like full time, or at least the majority of their time. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs provides a pretty good template to understand like what it is about people that we would like need. Like just technological dependency probably wouldn't be enough to like sustain enjoyment in synthetic worlds. We would actually have to like rely on some of these needs. Like we'd have to feel safe in some way, have some sort of like security. We would probably want to feel a strong sense of community, feel loved in some way. We would want to engage in behavior that would reward our self-esteem, and so we can hold ourselves to a high self-esteem, and also be able to engage in activities that would allow us to like self-actualize, like engage in art or something that feels like we're achieving a higher purpose. The interesting thing is that already today, we can click on the next one. We've already kind of outsourced a lot of these types of behaviors into synthetic worlds. Like all of these are virtual assets in some sense. We just don't really recognize them as that in our daily lives, but already you can see like most of these things, some form or fashion, like influence a lot of people's lives, developed worlds. And if you click on to the next one, the problem with all these synthetic apps or all of these virtual assets, though, is that like as we all know, we don't really own them, right? These are pieces of intellectual property owned by the platforms that run them. And so the two big problems with that is that one, we can we're stuck in the platform in terms of like we can only extract value from these virtual assets in the way that the platforms let us, right? So if we have a group of friends, we can only engage with those friends in the way that Facebook allows us, which like might seem very dynamic, but there's some interesting possibilities for like how you can also interact with people in other ways. But even like more fundamentally than that, there's a trend of deplatforming people whose views are like controversial in some way. And so, for example, like if Chelsea and I are following each other on Twitter, and that's the only way that we're connected, and one of us gets deplatformed, it's going to be really hard and expensive to replace that relationship, like find each other again. And that's just for like one connection on Twitter, right? You've maybe hundreds of thousands of followers. Like, how would you ever replace that? And so that's also a big problem. So click on to the next one. What this really prompts is two big questions. The first one is, so if we don't own our assets now, what would it look like if we did own our assets? And on the next slide, we would probably want to decentralize them in some way. And so it's important to note, because I go around to like, I go around like blockchain conferences and I'll talk about this. And at some of them, they'll say like, oh, well, there's blockchain involved in the video game. So therefore, there's true ownership, and that's just not true. Sometimes blockchains are run on someone's server, and so that's like a totally worthless blockchain. It's the same as what we have now. So this is just like a pretty good overhead of like some blockchain projects that I would trust with decentralizing or like with true ownership of my assets. So Bitcoin, Ethereum, Plasma, which is a scalability solution, but it maintains the same level of security as Ethereum. So it's just like a way to have like high transaction throughput on Ethereum without compromising security, basically. Blockstack, which is currently plugged into Bitcoin. It's secured by the Bitcoin network, but it's interoperable with Ethereum, which is a really awesome benefit. And then IPFS, which is interoperable with both Ethereum and Blockstack and can be designed to like build really sort of like front end, which is pretty awesome. And so just as an example from Forward, like how we've decided to start building these synthetic worlds and like helping other people to build their synthetic worlds as well. We developed a proof of concept for DEF CON in November. This is called Plasma Dog. And this might be where we lose another visual. So if we jump over here, we can just check out some gameplay. Where?
Yeah, we had a meetup here.
What's that?
We had a meetup here for this one. This game's good. I still haven't beat it actually.
No, I haven't either, and I wasn't there.
Consider yourselves plasma dolls.
Is there a video?
Yeah, where'd the article go? Oh, it's okay. Anyway, it's a 2D platformer. So as you're running through, there's coins, you collect them. All the coin transactions are made on chain, so you really own them. So it's all happening in real time. Just super awesome.
Does anyone speedrun it?
We set up an achievement to do a speedrun in under 10 minutes. I don't know if anyone's gotten the achievement yet.
Yeah, there's some blind jumps in there that were pretty dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple dirty blind jumps later on in those levels where I was like, oh man, how was I supposed to guess left or right?
Yeah, and there's also like a lot of coins too that are very, I don't know if they're like well hidden, but so the architecture for this on the back end looks like this. So Ethereum is the root chain. Omisego is a blockchain company or decentralized platform. In the Ethereum space, they're running a child chain, which is Plasma based. So Plasma is plugged into Ethereum. That's what's securing our transactions.
Child chain, what is used in Plasma? I've never heard child chain.
Okay, yeah. So there's two different ways that like Plasma could be implemented. One is as a child chain, which is where there's a smart contract deployed on Ethereum, and the two networks are like very, very closely connected. Where if somebody tries to misbehave on the child chain, the Ethereum main chain will correct it. The other way that you see transactions processed by Plasma is if somebody puts it on a side chain, and it's on a side chain, that means it's again like basically someone's private database, or they can decentralize it a little bit. But then what they're doing is they're taking that side chain and they're just like sending information to Ethereum, and they're just writing to it and saying, I trust this side chain, it's good information. But there's no actual relationship between the side chain and the Ethereum main chain. So that's how that works. Board is the service provider. So we're the one plugging in the game, which is the decentralized application, Plasma Dog. And then there are assets in the game, such as different characters and coins in the game, which are the virtual assets. Basically, I think if you click one more time, it might do something. Okay,
It's a Plasma Dog and a Bufficorn, if I'm correct, right?
Yes.
A
Yeah.
Buffalo Unicorn. Which is
I thought it was a joke about like a really buff unicorn, and it took me to like the end of that event to realize it was a buffalo unicorn. I thought they were just like, no, we're a strong unicorn now.
Colorado.
And I really thought that was it. Like it didn't even faze me that it was weird.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it does look pretty buff though.
It is.
Yeah, it's got some muscles. What we did for that guy is so at Ethereum Denver, they have a mascot, which is the Bufficorn. So we digitized the character from the mascot, so everyone who was in attendance got a special token, and then they could play as the Bufficorn. And Plasma Dog instead of Plasma Dog. I've got some extra tokens. But I mean, basically, you can ignore all the architecture in the middle. The takeaway is that the assets are secured at the same level as Ethereum. So on to the next slide. The second question, so if we know like what true ownership is and how do we get to mass exodus, this is also kind of like a difficult question to answer. But on the next one, we can look at models that already exist in the blockchain space, and this is sort of where we're venturing into like the decentralized intellectual property or DIP concepts and how they sync well with the DeFi stuff. And we can look at decentralized exchanges as sort of a model, and I'll talk about this in a second, but the basic thing to keep in mind is that an exchange is not just a set of buy and sell orders. You can also think of an exchange as a relayer of some kind. So on the next slide, this is kind of how relayers or decentralized exchanges work right now. Is there are different tokens, at least in the Ethereum ecosystem. There are different tokens that are minted by the Ethereum blockchain, by the different projects that are building on it. And so those have their own like sources of origin. Like it's from the projects, they mint them, they get distributed to the community. The community members can own these tokens. And then different businesses have deployed these relayers, which are decentralized exchanges. So the token holders can go to these decentralized exchanges. They can ask the exchange to go ahead and trade the tokens for them. But the exchange never holds the tokens from the holders of the tokens. It's all just done in smart contracts automatically, which means that this interface is just that. It's just an interface. Like anyone can build an interface that is competing with someone else's interface. Whatever the better interface is, more people would find that as a better user experience. Therefore, the exchanges can charge a higher fee.
How do we protect against elusive or fraudulent interfaces that are saying something will happen? You know, like, oh, you're sending me this much on chain, and then it might prompt the user for more, and they don't notice.
That's a good question.
Yelp. Let's use Yelp.
Yeah. I mean, well, okay. I mean, like
it's an attack vector. That's all.
Yeah.
We got to keep an eye to that.
That's super true.
Like provability at the user level.
At the highest level, you could audit it yourself. Not everyone has that skill, right? So it relies on like some social proofing, or who knows like what mechanisms end up popping up out of that. But like, if there is someone in the ecosystem who you trust, you could probably see they like tweet about a certain decentralized exchange. I don't know if anyone else has like any tips for trusting a decentralized exchange.
Uniswap's been doing well so far.
Yeah, Uniswap is a really good one.
Trust 2.0 software.
Yeah.
Everyone gets their first hack, and they can trust it.
That's an issue from like any wallet.
That's a
major problem.
Yeah.
Well, so we see a similar model with games as well, where so with Horde, we're enabling other games to be able to tokenize their assets. People who don't even create a game could create some sort of new game item, like not build a game, just build an item for it, and it could be incorporated into someone else's game. So we kind of see a similar separation between both the items that exist in games and the actual game as an interface, just like decentralized exchanges. So yeah, and then this is just replaying the GIF from earlier with the Ready Player One stuff. But the basic idea is like you could probably extrapolate this model even further, where all of the virtual assets that you're used to could be minted either into a token, or there's like other very clever ways to have true ownership of your virtual assets. And then as you're engaging in different online activity, there's different user interfaces for how you are able to interact with your virtual assets. Like maybe there would be 5 different Twitter relayers, right? And you could like view Twitter in unique ways. Like there could be a whole marketplace of different algorithms for how tweets are organized. Nobody would have to be banned from the platform. You could just like set your algorithm to filter people that you don't want to see, or you could even like jump into more controversial threads. So it would just sort of like open up, it would decentralize virtual experiences too, which I think is something that we end up missing quite a bit. We talk about decentralizing power structures, but we don't talk about like actually decentralizing experiences, and that's going to be a big conversation that I think pops up in the next like 2 to 3 years. Yeah, so at this point, it's a little ironic that I would say give us a follow on Twitter, at Word Exchange, and then I'm at CBotRoms.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Because we're getting to the end of the night, do we want to launch right into Taylor and Anders? We're closing and capping it off with a walkthrough of some of the AO here. Our autonomous software platform that doesn't involve a blockchain because it does not need to. It is just a platform for us to maintain access to this shared space as a collective. And it splits up the rent amongst us and either allows us at the door or bars us. Taylor has been, I'd say, the prime software architect on this. Taylor, aka Rhodes. And yeah, you want to give us a little. This computer basically runs on the AO. It's on degree, so go for it.
Just put it up there.
Yeah, I'll bring it up right now.
Yeah, so what I've attempted to build is software to help manage shared space. And it's been kind of actively running this space for about 6 months. And it's at decontrol.ca. And there's a concept of bounties built into it. So that's what I'm going to focus specifically talking about right now. And yeah, can you log in? So the real purpose, or the real thing that I think is possible as we go into the future, is having deals between people that are really fair, and that wherever all of the knowledge is known to all of the parties, and they all are able to interact in a way that they know about what it's going to be like, and they're able to interact, and it's all good. And that's kind of what the vision for what AO can allow. And it, yeah, you have to remember this.
That goes down.
So yeah, the concept of bounties in the context of the space was that you could get a discount on membership essentially by doing the bounties in the space. So there's 4 bounties listed here. One of them is garbage, and one of them is cleaning the washroom. And no one's really doing the bounties, sadly to say.
Well, it's great. That's a hyper-specific different bounty that someone put up for themselves. Like someone wanted to learn Arch Linux, and so they used this pretty broad system to be like, someone teach me Arch Linux. Is that pegged to 100? Like, is it pegged to Canadian? Or?
Yeah, points are 3 points for a beer, so that's as close as it's pegged to anything.
Just their points.
We should change from bounty to bonus, I think.
Yeah.
Bonus points.
And right now within the application, bounties are created by any member, and there's no limit on the amount that could be created, and there's no attempt within the app itself to prevent abuse, other than the fact that everyone sees everything that's happening. So just the fact that it's transparent, I think, is really enough. Like if it's a system that people are engaged in, I think just the social aspects of you can't just make $1,000 bounty and then claim it, or we haven't had people doing that. So the mechanics of the bounties, can you go to the bounty tab? Bounty tab, yeah. So eventually this functionality is going to get totally consumed by the cards. And actually, the concept of bounties was in the application before the concept of cards and the idea of cards came in. So they're just kind of overlapped, and now it's more generic. You create cards, and that's the mechanism of communication. And then cards are upgraded to bounties if you want to. The bounties fall into 2 categories. One is a bounty that is recurring, which means it's something that's set up. And it's something that always needs to get done. And you set a monthly value to that. And then it just collects value and then pays out to the member who claims it and then collects value. So it collects at a rate. So it's kind of like an easy way to create a budget for doing the basic cleanup tasks was the idea. And then there's one-time bounties, which are just a single thing that after it's claimed, it goes away. And yeah, I think this concept of kind of adding value to the tasks you want to do and communicating with each other to kind of like come to a decision about what needs to be done and setting a value to it and it being part of a community thing, I think gets the bounty close enough to the actual thing happening, where the knowledge about like how it needs to be done and if it's actually done well is. And I think the closer you get to that, or the closest the feedback mechanism gets to that, the better. Or I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but yeah. Does anybody have any questions, or to talk more about how the app works? Yeah, it manages a list of members and a list of resources. The resources are for access to spaces or access to resources. So the ones we have set up here are in the front door and in the vending machine. So click use just to demonstrate the power.
And let's do another one without the screen share. So someone point the camera to the beer machine.
Another one.
We're gonna do this again. There we go, perfect. And I'm gonna hit use one more time. Man.
Oh, Tom is here.
Pop has appeared for the machine.
Pop, yes. Pop.
And yeah, the concept is this software is free. People can set up their own spaces like this and go with this idea. Right? The idea is that this platform of communication can kind of spread and it can kind of be a layer, and it's a layer of the actual community, of the actual people around you, and it's ways to interact with the people actually close to you in a way that's supposed to be fun. And yeah, it's actively changing a lot. And if you want to or are interested in the code, come on to Keybase. Decontrol Van is the group, and it's just an open group. And the Keybase, there's a code repo called Air, where all of this code is. Yeah, we need help. And, yeah.
What I find really interesting about the
it's working though. It's doing a thing, and I think it's ready for it to be spread, or other people to start experimenting it, so we can get more feedback and more engagement.
Tell us about the lightning.
Only for members? Or only for members?
Well, we had recently, we had just a couple of days ago, been kind of discussing the idea of like proliferating fobs so that people can start using it. It's currently like membership is an all or nothing deal of door access, etc. But like people, want to buy pop or things like that, or want to get a small bounty for taking the trash out in, like in this day and age. Then I feel like next step is to float more fobs out in the world. There's also playing with an RFID fob if you haven't used it outside of like apartment buildings.
Yeah, I would feel good about making accounts for everybody right now, and you can.
Well, did we get those fobs?
If you go to the account page, we don't have the fobs yet.
Oh, okay.
The dashboard. So new members can be created by any member. So that's your way into any of these places that I've set up, is by knowing a member that's already in, and they can make an account. And then you can log in with the username and password, and you can put a fob, and the fob is just a little tag with a number on it. And then you can use that, and as long as your account is known to us, your fob will work.
How many members do you have now?
It says 32.
Oh, 32.
Mm-hmm. So we used to split everything manually with a spreadsheet, and just like we would have to have a pretty fixed, we would have to vote on lowering the rent as we onboarded more people. But this does the sweet math of kind of splitting up. At any given time, you can know the state supposedly of the network, just like markets in general. This is probably an inflated figure from who might, sustain. Like there is a huge turnover rate at membership-based spaces. So there may be, like 24 people coming around regular, 32 are identified in the system as active users. But there's churn, because I was gone for like 5 months, and actually it closes your Lightning channel elegantly. I told Taylor I got booted when I didn't have enough for the monthly rent like a month ago, and I just noticed I got a payment of Bitcoin for this like small amount that was left in my Lightning channel, and it was sad but very elegantly done. It sent me my leftover change.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's $60 each now per month?
Yeah, it's been below 50 recently. And then we kind of lost some members with the market turn down, but with the market turn up, I would expect some more members will be joining.
That's brilliant.
Fresh round of interest, and people
So-
need to learn about us.
So we did Taylor also did code the pop machine to take lightning payments. So we can also simulate. We can also someone could pay for a pop in the machine with the lightning
got
as well.
any channels open with us right
No.
Do you have any sponsors?
No, we fight them.
Yeah, we don't do that.
Yeah, we don't.
It changes the space.
You can give us, you can donate if you want, but we will not credit you.
Okay.
It's like one of those things, like, because if we start accepting sponsor money, it's like people would want something back, and then we have
Obligation, yeah.
Yeah, it's some sort of obligation.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to float around the idea of like just a more expensive membership that doesn't go down in price with the rest of them, and like
to keep weed out the trash.
no, for people that can afford it, they want to give back, but
Yeah.
like understand that there's no
Yeah.
sponsorship. This time, how many would actually do it? Who knows?
I need a card about that. That's like ability to donate above the monthly amount.
Yeah, like you can still just donate, but it'd be nice if you know your donation was making rent cheaper. One of the things I really wanted is enough active members, so it was like $20 or $30 each. You know, it'd be like double what we had now.
That would be really
Then more people would be like, oh, I can do $20, $30 a month.
Yeah.
It's done all this card features.
It's a magic
Okay.
number.
So
Yeah, like a bounty would be the thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can donate
Vex?
to bounties is the idea. So if you can put up a bounty that you want to pay, like that's like the Linux one they were showing earlier. Like if like you want to help something, you can basically be like, yo, I'm offering money as a bounty to someone who will spend the time to teach me this.
You've not looked at your gifts recently. That's really old.
okay.
Yeah,
whatever. No one's. I don't know.
Judging.
I want to pay the bounties.
It's like 3 months old. Probably.
Okay, so we're gonna just demonstrate the card creation right now.
Yeah, so everything is actively changing, but the concept is you have a deck of cards, and you can create new cards and you can pass them around, and you can add upgrades to the cards. And the upgrades that we have now are to share the card on the pin board, so that's making it a guild or making it a bonus, or putting a value to it, so that's putting a bounty to it, or setting it a time in the future, so then there's a countdown on the card about a time in the future. So let's make a card. Let's make a purple card.
How do we do this?
Click the purple.
Good. Purple. All right, click the purple.
And then say. It's fun. And eventually there'll be a way to change cards in the future. So
refresh?
Yeah, we need a refresh. So we need help with the sockets, but eventually it'll be fast. And I think so now if you go into that card, so if you click to activate it and then click the vine.
Which one's the vine?
Right, beside the boat.
Beside the boat?
That's the one.
This one?
It looks like seagulls.
So now you've like switched the context and you're within this card. So if you create another card, so grab a green one maybe.
Plus add one?
Yeah. So this is adding a blue card into this. Okay, press enter. So you'll see often these small images, and those are like small visualizations about the card within, and you just navigate into that card. So go back.
Hit the back button?
Yeah.
All right.
So if you scroll down, now that blue card is within this purple card, and if you go back again, you have that purple card on your deck, and that blue card's within it. So you have this recursive structure that goes all the way out. And if many people are holding the same cards, and many people are putting cards within cards, then it's all updating this layer of data together. And it's this implicit communication that really emphasizes the idea, and it really emphasizes positive action and trying to do something. which most internet communication platforms don't emphasize those things. So I think this is the concepts I'm going for. And trying to just create a whole different layer of communicating. Yeah, Anders has been helping, and he's going to explain everything.
So Taylor, it actually solves a problem then. What you're saying?
I hope so.
Yes. Unlike so many projects that we know, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say earlier. Is like this is so there are a lot of projects globally that are trying to create a platform to do X, and this is a hyper local project. This software arose organically from the needs of this physical weird ass space. And we have actual code ghosts here. If you're here late at night and you're coding, weird things will happen. It's definitely not being tired. It's code ghosts. So those have shaped it. Like this arises out of, and that's where you see like the absurd, magnificent creativity. I just came back recently just to visit, and I'm like, holy shit! Like this, you guys have created something that there is a steep initial onboarding into, like the sort of navigation, but it creates something meaningful. I feel like we're so used to throwaway data and material design and shit like that, and it's like this is somewhere I will store thoughts that are meaningful.
Yeah, and I actually just implemented a decentral backup server. So decentral members, if you want, you can plug in a hard drive, and I can set you up a user account, and you can set up whatever kind of backup you want. Or I can help you set up the backup system that I use, which is Word Backup, which does versioned, encrypted backups that you can mount across the internet, and then they have the versions right inside in folders, and so I can access my backups in like 10 seconds over the internet, and the backup happens every hour. So I finally solved the backup problem, like for my computer, and since I have the AO installed on my personal computer, I have my personal like private cards there, and then the ones I want to share socially, I copy and paste into the AO here. Yeah, so it's actually solving like my whole information management problem personally, and it just needs like 4 or 5 more features until it's basically like complete as far as you need for personal information management. I actually prepared a presentation, a brief presentation. If you want to click left on the gifts, it should be the last card that you received. The left arrow above the gifts, the red arrow. Yeah, that's mine.
Oh, that's so cool. Surprise!
Yeah. And then, that's my presentation. It should be shared.
And when you press accept, what happens?
It adds to your collection of cards, your deck.
Oh, you just accept the card.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you drop it, then it might go to the collective discard pile. If the other person also, well, actually, if they dropped it, then it will disappear from your gifts. So they have to still be holding it, so it will go back to them presently. They'll still have it.
Oh yeah.
They have it the whole time.
They get it back.
Are you going to go into? Are you going to go into the mental stack, like the cognitive model? Because I feel like that's very valuable to what he was asking, like the way we're storing. You've modeled the stacks after our cognitive stacks.
Yeah, I have. What were you saying about those roles? What were you asking?
Oh, I just feel it's a really good fit to like what he was getting at there. Really goes towards the cognitive stack of like we're all trying to hold a lot of thoughts in our mind.
Yeah, let me do that after the first like 2 or 3 slides. It'll fit in just right there. Cool. So kind of origins of these cards and how to play maybe, or there's a link at the end about that, and then teleology. If anyone doesn't know that word from philosophy, it's where things are headed, it's the direction of things, the final goal, or like intensity towards something, that something has the purpose of something, the final purpose or goal. The etymology is goalpost. Where's my slides?
Yeah, can you do your slides?
I can do my slides. Yeah, of course. Okay, so a couple years ago, I read this book, The Blacksmith Game by Hermann Hesse. And he wrote it in 1943, or he published it in 1943. He started writing it about 10 years before that. And I'm pretty sure he wrote it with a Zettelkasten, which is a German word for index card box. And I think he had a giant filing cabinet of index cards that were all filed in little tiny drawers. And I think he sequenced the entire book perfectly hierarchically using this tool. Because when you read this book, I listened to the book on tape, it's perfectly hierarchically structured. recursively, and the entire book, there's like not a single loose thread. There's like, it's complete perfection. And and I just mean technically, like you can say whatever you want about the content, but technically it's like weirdly perfect. And he knew about Zettelfastens, and it's a German word, and I think he used them. I think he probably used them to write this book. And there's Hermann Hesse, and he won the Nobel Prize probably related to that book 3 years later.
He was a geek back then.
Yeah, exactly. So let me go back to that. Yeah, so to your question, in that book, there's this mysterious glass bead game that this academic district or region plays and teaches its students. So all the students are sent to this academic district, and then they play this card. They don't say it's a card game. It's this game called the glass bead game, and it originated from music. This music instructor was trying to make analogies of different melodies. So he put beads on strings, kind of like an abacus, and then moved them around to make different analogies between different melodies. And so then the way you play this game is you take turns playing any sort of quotation from any field of human knowledge or art or creation. So you can quote like a part of a symphony, or you can quote part of a book, or you can quote part of a movie, or whatever, anything you want to link. And you take turns, and the point is not to just like build up a pile or to like share things, although those are part of it too. But the point is actually to build up a meaningful sequence of these things that evoke like a kind of an epiphantic experience for the person who's involved in this. So making allegories and analogies across multiple fields so that you can see the synthesis and the coalescence between these different fields and their different meanings into one, not one system of signification, but one paradigm of symbolization. So it's a little more flexible. And in this book, the Glass Bead Game Association that makes the official rules that pretty much everyone plays by, they publish the official symbols of the game, which are the symbols that you can write down moves that people make in. So abstractly, without maybe reference to the original documents, but how things are being brought in and related and imprinted into the sequence of the game. And so I wrote a paper a year and a half ago. I was working for Hollow. I actually named HoloChain, the technology, and they named Hollow technology. I started working for Hollow, and they are working on HoloChain. But while I was working for them, I made this paper, Rex plus HoloChat, the ultimate chat paradigm. So if you and basically like the AO is almost implementing all the features described in this paper, more or less to spec. And I think Taylor, because Taylor did virtually all the work, added like 3 tiny features in the last like week and a half. So I've done virtually no programming on the layout. Taylor made all of that, and as he was designing it, I think his design decisions are really awesome and beautiful. And he did. I didn't design that far, but I designed kind of the paradigm of, how to trade. I was thinking I could scroll down on the page, but you can't. So I designed the paradigm of how to trade the cards and why the cards need to be traded in a certain sequence. And so, for example, with the AO, what we're going to be able to do soon is you're going to have holographic priorities. So inside every card, you'll be able to prioritize cards. And then from the top down, you'll be able to say, here are my cards I prioritize. How many layers down do I want to read my priorities up? And so it's like, imagine your priorities are skyscrapers of different heights, and you want to, like, you're in your like little helicopter, like your little Bowser thing, and you're going up and down, and you can see above, or the clouds are going up and down. You can see your top priorities, or you can see like a little more detail. And what we're going to do though is we're going to make us do that across people, or across any guild, or across any 2 cards. So across any context, you can see what the most important or critical factors are that everyone has collectively marked. And within each stack, you can move cards up and down, and anyone can do that, so it's easy to see how the order is changed. So anyway, so there's one thing. And then here are the rules to the cards. These cards, but they're dangerous. Be careful. They're very dangerous. So I was going to introduce a new thing tonight. This is the first time that I'm sharing this word publicly. Xenoreaction. So some of you have maybe heard of neoreaction, which is like a far right phenomenon. Xenoreaction is, of course, neither left nor right, and it's some sort of new third option that's coming out of let's not say left field, but it's coming out of some other field. And so XRX, oops, keep pressing the wrong. Yeah, so there's this Xerox machine, there's this anti-synthesis phenomenon that's occurring in like Trump Nation situation. There's like new levels of like ironic meta poverty critique. I don't know what this is, but it's really advanced. And the antiodromia, it means when things become so extreme, they become their own opposite. So a few years ago, I was working on a satirical corporation called, or made up corporation called Sots Corp, Sorcery of the Spectacle Corporation. And so there's this invading media spectacle, and then we can actually mock evil before it happens. So by the time they come out with like some new evil product, we already have made fun of it and moved on. And it works. It works really well. And you can debug your friends with our handy toolkit. No brainwashing required. And then, escape from capitalism, the game. And so like you'll see, we're taking like myths and narratives and plugging them all together and working that into the cards. And this works really, really well with Horde because at first when you started talking about Horde, I was like, no, capitalism in games, in my games. But then as you were talking, I was like, no, this is the only thing that can make this real. So if we actually make the virtual assets, the narrative assets real, then we can make physical assets primarily narrative assets first. And then that's when we win. Flip the narrative. And so like, see, if you've ever played Chrono Trigger, that's Lavos, this evil star that like burrows into the earth 65 million years ago, wipes out the dinosaurs, brings magic to the earth, creates this red stone, and then it sleeps in the earth until harvest, when it then spits its spawn out into take over other planets. But maybe it's actually the anger of Mother Earth. And the dog star Sirius. So have you seen the Big Chungus? We're gonna watch. 2019. Is there sound? There has to be sound for this.
We gotta turn up the speakers. Hold on.
Okay.
Are these off? They're off.
I turned them off when they were being buzzy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll turn one on. That should be enough.
Cool. That's good. The bass though.
That's fine.
That's added distortion. It's in the video. Yeah. Okay, so I would like to invite you all to take a look at the Horde, which is what I've been calling the pile of change in the back room. I've been calling the pile of change in the back room the Horde. What?
Autoplay.
Oh, go ahead, yeah. What is this?
We're gonna talk about the details of
Yeah, so there it is, the pile of change. Yeah, and there were, what was that? I don't know what that was.
Confused.
But yeah, there's a pile of change in the back, which is David wonderfully named Coin Blender. So please, if you have some change, add some change to our pile. If you need some change, I'm not going to say anything.
It's for anonymizing change, like crypto coin blenders will
It's a real life Bitcoin mixer for
you
your
can
change.
bring your change and pick up other change that's someone else's change.
You can replicate the pile, like if you want to like install a coin blender on your own table, just take some of the coin blender from our table and then just install a coin blender on every table that you find. And we're upgrading the currency with new capabilities on the blockchain, the dark chain. So then there's this great story if you want to read more about stuff like this, and then there were done by Eric and Russell. Russell has been pushing this recently because it's about trading favors on cards. And then there's this book, Moneki Neko by Bruce Sterling, which was written like 1992, and it's about trading favors on electronics. And I was actually going to read this. It would take about 20 or 30 minutes to read if people are interested. It's a wonderful short story, really trippy about what is everything I just said. And I just found the story like 2 days ago. Anyone interested in that? Yeah, no?
Maybe back room.
Yeah, back room?
That sounds
Cool.
like a back room chat.
Okay, cool. So I'll put
Where
that there.
that's where the coin blender is.
And
If you do have some change in your pocket just for the fun of it, come blend it and take some other change.
I blended my change.
Help us. It's like Tor. We need you to help us anonymize this change by contributing your change to it.
Yeah.
It's like a Bitcoin mixer, but less people.
And yeah, we're always looking for meaningful contributions to the community, which can be just showing up and spiritedly discussing these things with us. It can be giving feedback on the AO. It can becoming a key holder here and helping us with the intense systemic project management problems of an anarchic space.
You guys have everyone's.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he taught me this. I've been like doing shit here for a long time, and he pointed out that the only way to indicate to an audience that something is over is the people who are talking the most at the end just have to walk out of the room.
Thank you.
Love you guys.
No one made those if you don't do that. I catch myself just like standing up there and I'm like, okay guys, so we're talking now. And then eventually I'm like, wait, that's not. You gotta exit stage. Yeah, you just exit stage.
Yeah.
I was just thinking in terms of obviously it's I think for sponsor, so they say, well, I'm gonna sponsor that. Sponsor it, right? Like, they like because assuming like they're gonna. Yeah, pretty sure. So, like, whenever I'm here, so I'm gonna throw some.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to be. I'm sure there's some that are like this.
Or just use like. So I guess like that is like whatever is on there. Other people can just throw.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Because I guess I can't imagine it's just something that.
Yeah, but what got it. No, exactly. If I ever do,
somebody adding like are you for your own thing? Yeah, are you
oh, the best person to talk to.
And weekly or whatever.
Just become a member. I'd love to know more about that.
We'll give you a key right now. Yeah, we'll give you a key right now. You got everyone show up.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
that's how it works.
Well, the best way I ever heard described is. Have you ever just wanted a lightweight place in downtown Vancouver to like come and hang out?
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe how useful it is, right?
Yeah, you get like I come here after work downtown, so like I know traffic. So if you have this money going home early, I'm like, hey, I'll stay here. Right? Yeah, we literally like we weren't joking. Yeah. We're low on fobs right now. Yeah, we are low on your member. You can open it to the AO.
Yeah, pretty much membership.
Yeah, you can open it to the AO.
So we plan to hear off too.
Yeah, you can do it for your phone.
Yeah, no, you just go ahead.
This guy's gonna sign you out. Welcome.
Oscar, you started. Pick your activity.
So I gotta make events to pass off specific data, and then just reference the event passing off those data types.
We have a standard thing right there next to
So I'm thinking battle should be, so selling should be one, it should be like, just pass on the event based off the address of the seller, the amount of the size of the planet, and how much the value is. Right? So that's 3 things. Steve Roberts telling me things that come with 3 things in the event. So a battle should go off. So the battle.
You want to put some funky music on, bro?
Yeah, I can do that.
So far is the type of kill. Or sending another.
We stop broadcasting? Kelsey? Want to stop broadcasting or keep going with this?
Oh, are we still broadcasting?
Yeah, we are.
Good night, Internet. We love you. Deep in our bellies.
All the battles.
Is that what you do? You hang up on internet.
Yeah, you're hanging up on the internet.
Leave call. But, yeah, okay, good.